So I'm personally extremely pleased that she's willing to come and share some of this with us. And she's right in the middle of a crowdfunding campaign, which last night she actually reached the amount of money, right, targeted, but still short on the numbers of people. So I think that, at the end of this session, if we all want to go on our crowdfunding campaign and buy a book in advance, that would be really cool. So I'm going to do that. And I encourage us all to do that together. You can pretend you're doing it if you don't want to stick out, But at the end of the session, I want to invite us to all go together and buy the book right there at once and make some kind of weird history to do that. So I think I've said enough. Saleema, Vellani, take it away.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to make sure that you can see. Thanks for the introduction. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Perfect.
You see the slides? Okay, everyone can hear me and see me. Perfect. And sometimes I'm sorry if I look away, it's like I have a couple screens here, so I'm going to try my best to look at the camera. So thank you so much, Michael. I'm really excited to be here. And I know we have people from around the world, which is great. I really wanted to present something to a group of early adopters, such as other innovation and leadership coaches and other folks that are, in this space of innovation and creativity, to really get a lot of feedback on one of my book chapters that I've never presented before, especially because there's a lot of, I guess, I got a lot of different interesting perspectives, and I'll tell you more about it. Just, for those of you who don't know me, I basically teach Johns Hopkins University, as well as entrepreneurship. And yes, I'm the author of Innovation Starts with I. I work as an innovation strategist. I do some consulting work for international organizations such as the World Bank, a bunch of different international finance institutions. Really, I'm passionate about social impact. So really helping, bring this type of thinking into places, especially in the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, design thinking workshops in Liberia, Morocco, a lot of, working with governments and different stakeholders. I'm also very passionate about amplifying people's message and, their influence in order to make their impact in the world. And so my current company that was born out of COVID, actually, that happened, a lot of people were like, hey, we need we need to be able to build our online presence and stuff. So that's something that I've been doing recently as well. And then a lot of the design thinking has actually I do a lot of speaking on it, but it's actually been less in demand in the sense of, in-person workshops and sprints, just because of the current state of the world. Democratized. And then, as I mentioned, I teach, and I'm really passionate about teaching. And so I'm going to dive into the topic of intuition today, and I want to, keep this pretty interactive. So I want you guys to use the chat as much as possible. I'm going to try to see if I can open up the chat here. I'm not sure if I see it. I'll keep it open in case there's any questions, especially if there's something that I'd be able to take during the session. And so basically, intuition is one of my book chapters. I'll show you in a second where it fits. But basically, we hear a lot about intuition, and intuition is important for leadership. We hear a lot about intuition in the self-help industry. You hear a lot of self-help gurus. These are some screenshots from Instagram, that there's a lot of, trust your gut, trust your intuition. And it has sort of gained a bit of a bad rap in a bit of the corporate and business world, in that, they say, yes, trusting your gut is important, but then there's this bit about the psychic aspect of it, or the spiritual aspect of it, that a lot of people don't resonate with, and they're like, I disagree with that, or it's a little bit too woo-woo, and be sort of an interesting thing, just because those that sort of build it and understand the power of it understand, but oftentimes there's some triggers around that with certain leaders, and that's what I found with some of my interviewees. And so I wanted to dive into this topic more. The reason why, we know that logic isn't enough. A lot of us know that, we can't just use logic. There's other things that are needed. There's emotions. We're moving into this feeling economy, we're faced where people are needing to reinvent themselves. There's a lot more feeling happening. The skills that matter for the future of work happen to be around feeling, around communication, around, sales and marketing, human skills that, can't really be replaced by automation, technology, and bots. And so, it's important to be able, that skill of intuition, the capability to be able to use your intuition is increasing. And so what I'm trying to say is, my book is called it's called Innovation Starts with I. And I have, different, the book initially was like, innovation starts with I. It starts with you. It starts with the individual. It starts with the mindset. And I was really curious about this because, I was like, I don't think it's just about I, there's so much more than that, because it happens with we. And, there's collaboration and all that. That's how innovation gets executed. But I thought, what does that mean when we say it? People, a lot of my interviewees were asking, what does the I stand for? Is it just I as in the individual? Is it inclusion? And then I started really digging into that. I was also, we see here, like there's a lot of way that they use their intuition to make decisions. They make better decisions using their intuition. And, so I started digging into this concept. And so I interviewed, I realized I couldn't do it all on my own. If I just talk about my own experiences, that might not be enough credibility, and I might not be able to, go beyond my own perspective. And so I wanted to gain more. And so I went and I interviewed a bunch of people like, Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model canvas, a lot of different leaders we see here, Christy Wallace, the CEO of Elevate, a lot of different folks from HR, technology, different fields, whether they were leaders or entrepreneurs in the social impact space as well. And eventually I realized, there were a lot of different views on this. I even found some experts on intuition, and went beyond that. Like, I was asking all my interviewees, what are the most important skills for the future of work? A lot of them actually said intuition was one of them. And so I ended up including intuition, if you see here on the third chapter, intuitive expertise, as part of my book. And I started digging in. As you see, each chapter starts with I won't go deep into the different, this is my table of contents. I won't go too deep into it, but basically you'll see that there's a different capabilities, and, between, storytelling, influence, being kind and having empathy, being able to be introspective, having curiosity, originality. But I put intuition as one of them, just because I saw that through my interviews, being able to master that sixth sense of intuition was something that kept coming up, and it kept coming up in the research as well. And that it's not that sort of stuff that you see on Instagram of, trusting your gut and feeling what's good to you. It's more of a, developing expertise and using your intuition along with quantitative data and other factors. And that's really key for the future of work. And when I say that, it's not just about finding your sweet spot, it's really about developing your sweet spot. So when we talk about intuition, it's not supposed to just feel comfortable and what feels good to us. It's actually something that involves getting out of our comfort zone. When we're, dealing with constraints, it's about constraint optimization, and how do we actually thrive in constraints? How do we get out of our comfort zones? How do we develop our expertise while getting uncomfortable? Because doing something like that requires discomfort. And then eventually finding flow. So that's what that chapter is about. And from the research, I found that conscious awareness and unconscious processes operating together is what provides us with a worldview, and that's what intuition is all about. Has anyone read the book Thinking Fast and Slow before, by Daniel Kahneman? Okay, so Dennis, I think it's a fabulous book. I actually got to meet him on his book tour several years ago, and he really talks about, the different types of thinking, that there's two types of thinking: the intuitive, the fast type of thinking, and then the rational, slow type of thinking. And so, he talks about having an intuitive reaction can actually lead to problems, and like, what are the limitations of our common sense. And it's really interesting. I highly recommend it. And I think this book, when I first met him in 2013, I was very intrigued by that, because the book was, he's a Nobel Prize winner, and it really helped me kind of understand the way that we think. Sometimes we're reacting to certain things. I always tell, myself and others, whenever you're feeling emotional or something triggers you, just taking even a couple of days, when you get an email that sort of triggers something, instead of reacting right away, it's not about just trusting your gut and like what you want to say right away. Like, taking the time to process that and responding a couple of days later can go a long way, because it just takes time to process. And, we use intuition every day. This is an example, in a phenomenon known as blind sight. People that have gone blind because of brain damage, they can actually navigate an obstacle course or identify an emotion on a person's face, even though they can't consciously see it. And so it's, using their track while they're receiving visual stimuli, even though their conscious vision track isn't. And they can know what's around them. They just don't know how they know. We also see this, my parents are from Tanzania, so I'm East African by background, but by an example in the Maasai Valley, a lot of you see a lot of this in parts of the world, especially in Africa. Children that are tending herds of cows, they can count livestock simply by looking at them, and they might not be taught to count in the traditional Western sense, but they're able to look at the herd intuitively and estimate a sense of the whole, and it just becomes a different way of seeing things. We also see that intuition training is very common in the military because they're trained to tune into the power of their sixth sense during combat. So as another example. We also see intuitive arithmetic. Sometimes we just have to, if we're told to, hey, which group of numbers has, which one has more paper clips, it's, we are, we're just programmed to be able to use our intuition and rely on our intuition to count without actually counting one by one. And so you can kind of tell which group, which is obviously here on the right side, that has 11 paper clips. You can pretty much look, and your gut will tell you something. And so it's something that we've developed in different ways, including in math. And just beyond our five senses, we have our sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch, but we also have this set of spiritual senses. And I'm not sure if I'm going to call it spiritual senses in the book yet, just because I want to be able to appeal to readers that might not, I honestly think we're moving into a more spiritual world. And that's what, especially as we become, a lot of us are trying to reconnect to ourselves. And there's a lot of, people wanting to do things with more purpose. I have my own experience. Actually, it was when I was in Mozambique that I first had my first spiritual sort of experience, and that and made me become more aware of myself. And I got into all kinds of other stuff as I went on my own spiritual journey. And I can talk about some of that in the book, but I'm trying to figure out here, and this is maybe something we can discuss later, is this something that's a really truly spiritual sense that is beyond our five physical senses? And what I found with the research is that there's four main clair senses, and these are beyond our five physical senses, as I mentioned. And there's clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and claircognizance. And so clairvoyance is clear seeing. It's being able to strongly be able to pick up on people's emotions. You can really feel vibrations. There's clear hearing, which is being able to hear, beyond what someone's actually saying and what they actually really think and feel. And they're very good at analyzing what other people are communicating. There's also clear feeling, and this is, being able to really know what people are feeling. And this is connected to empathy in some ways. You can actually sometimes feel with them and feel their goosebumps. And an example is tells you that they something way in their life or something that some of us tend to be aspect. And then there's that feeling of knowing, and this is the one that's a little bit tricky, that I've been getting some pushback and some truly believe in it. And then there is a difference between psychic intuition and intuitive expertise. And so the psychic intuition part is something that there's been a bit of pushback on, just because there's a lot of people that don't agree with some of the science behind it, just because it's really hard to prove that. And so that's something I'm struggling with a little bit in communicating in the book. When we're able to use our intuition, another connection that I found is that we're able to be more of a dot connector, because using that skill of intuition, we're able to sort of see, things are connecting in our mind more naturally. And it's part of the, one of the skills I have the book actually, The Innovator's Dilemma, and some of the work that's been done at MIT. And it's really interesting because being able to use associative thinking, which is, drawing different expertise from different fields, from different areas, which, today it's actually great to be a generalist, because we're able to have that skill of taking things from different fields and adapting them or connecting them in a way that maybe hasn't been done before. And so dot connecting, I think, is one of the connections to intuition, and in terms of being able to innovate, because we're able to take different things and put them together in a new way. An example is, I've done work with how do we solve food insecurity in North Africa? So we started looking at, let's move away from soil. That's not working. Refugees can't plant in the ground. The climate conditions weren't great. I started looking at hydroponics. I'm actually in touch with a South African company in Joburg that does a lot of work in hydroponics. But basically, how can we actually use hydroponics? And, in Zimbabwe, we see that that's actually been successful. We see that in several African countries that's been very successful in the pilot phase, that hydroponics is a way to grow food without using soil. But that's not something that, traditional agronomists were looking at. And so that was actually me coming in to the World Bank, and they were like, hey, can you help us find the solution? I'm like, I don't know anything about agriculture, but they're like, that's the point, because you're an outsider. So you can actually come and, draw from your different fields and be able to use that innovative thinking to solve this problem. And so that's another example of dot connecting, being able to, take different things, put them together in a new way. So basically, my point is, logic is the math of decision making, and intuition is actually the actual art of it. So, logic, you can draw the picture, but intuition is what helps paint it. And that's where the innovation actually happens. I want to mention the rule of the 37%, which I actually have looked at Brian Christian. He's the author of Algorithms to Live By. And he talks about, like, for example, if you're looking at, the best odds of getting the best apartment, then you want to spend 37% of your apartment hunt, maybe 11 days if you give yourself a month for the search, and you want to just explore different options. And then you, after a certain point, after those 11 days, you should be prepared to immediately commit to the very first place you see that beats whatever you've already seen. So the part of intuition is also understanding, when it comes to decision making, knowing when to commit. And he talks a lot about the rule of 37%. There's a certain element. Otherwise, oftentimes we can spiralize and just, go nuts and not really know what to trust. And so, a lot of people ask, how do I trust my intuition? When do I know when to trust? And I don't think it's about, intuition. It's about how do we strengthen it to make it more trustworthy. And so how do we develop more trustworthy intuition? What I bring out in my book is that it's about, intuitive expertise. And so it's not just about all the stuff we hear in the self-help world. It's actually having deep domain experience, whether it's 10 plus years of experience in a certain field, really knowing something. I think that helps you develop your intuition further. That's some of the research I've been looking at. Maybe you've made a similar decision many times before. There's a bunch of different things in here. And then, intuition, testing intuitive judgments, and collecting data and applying reasoning. And one of my interviews actually talked about, he brings science into it because he trains a lot of leaders, and he says, a lot of them aren't ready to hear about psychic intuition. They get a bit turned off by all the woo-woo aspects of it or the spirituality aspects of it. And so, or maybe they're not into meditation and mindfulness, which actually helps as well. But he said, giving it a numerical scoring, so meeting them where they're at. So when you're talking to like a group of engineers or scientists, and they might not, believe in a lot of this stuff. So how do you actually introduce it to them? And, checking in with yourself, bringing in this quantitative component, like a measuring scale, and giving a rating from 0 to 10. So every time you're trying to improve an outcome, you basically build an adjustment factor, and then you basically use the error correction. So you basically use this numerical scoring method to test how well you're making your decisions. And you go back and you keep practicing. And basically it's a prediction function. And there's a way to actually, set this numerical scoring method for yourself so you can go back and see if you're improving. And over time, it's the goal. And another point that I want to bring up is, feelings are dynamic, they're not static. So it's about making the best decision at the right time. It's not just about, trusting your gut in the moment. It's doing what you can do, at that moment in time. But when we go back later, it's all about that reflection process, which comes back to the I, and being able to reflect, whether you're using the numerical scoring method, whether you're journaling, whether you're, trying to figure out how to, it's all about being able to make better decisions, but also to create new products. There is that aspect of intuition, and being able to know, even in design thinking, which idea do we want to go ahead and implement. And so I actually want to turn this into something more interactive, where I want us to discuss, how is intuition a catalyst for innovation in your experience? Does anyone have any stories, tips, tools, ideas, and any feedback for me in this chapter? Because like I said, this is the first time, I'm presenting anything on within the book on intuition, and it's something that I've gone back and forth and I've scrapped out. I said, no, I don't want to include it. it's maybe going to get a bit of conflict or tension, or people might not, some people might actually disagree with this being, I open it up to this group. And before I do so, I just wanted to say, yes, we are running a crowdfunding campaign. We did achieve our goal yesterday, and it's doing really well. And so if you're able to pre-order the book or support in any way, it would mean a lot to me. We're really trying to have a really big vision to take the, a lot of developing countries and be able to share it with people or the places that most need the message around, innovation being about, it's all about being human. It's not just about technology and ideas, and things shift the mindsets of people. And so that's my goal. And yeah, I'm hoping that I can really take this as well into many parts of Africa. And we do have a Facebook group. I can share the link in the chat in a second for, if you're an idealist, an innovator, an entrepreneur that's really passionate about making an impact in the world. We do a lot of collaboration and conversations in that group. But I'd like to bring it back to here. And I'm sorry, I wasn't able to pay attention to the chat, but I will look at it right now. So thank you so much.
Cool. So send people off into groups. Saleema, what question, how would you target the question for people to talk about?
Yeah, so I'd prefer like an open discussion so that we can come back later and debrief and share. But I'd really want to hear, yes, like how, in your experience or, and the thing that you've seen, how is intuition a catalyst for innovation? How are they connected? Because we haven't really, there's a bit of research on it, but it's still very preliminary. A lot of people, it's not really, there's not a lot on how intuition and innovation are connected, just because intuition has in the self-help world and less so in the innovation space. And so I want to bring that also into the leadership space. And so that's something I'd love to hear different people's thoughts on, just from your own experience. Any stories, any tools, etc.
Perfect.
Hi, Saleema. This is Sauri speaking. I'm not going to put my video on just yet. It's a mess in this place where I'm marking. So I'm going to speak from my experience in leadership and education. And without intuition, you cannot make any decisions because you're working with people. And whenever you work with people, you have to bring that sort of innate humanity into the situation. Otherwise, you might as well just work with, like you said, just with the tech. So I don't think you should be afraid of including it in your book at all, because it brings humanity into what we do. And if the last 5 months of teaching online and going remotely has taught me anything, it is that connection is everything. And it's like that mycelial network that the world works with. Humans connect on an intuitive level. We know when you walk into a room, you read the room. And EQ is all about that. So I think it connects to a lot of very relevant topics in leadership and in innovation, because if you can't walk in, read the room, and get connected to the people, no one's going to listen to your message. And I think that's essential.
Thank you. And can you elaborate a little bit on that, on innovation and how it's connected? Because we hear a little bit more on leadership, but less so in innovation.
Yeah, I often sit in meetings where I know, or where I shouldn't be, like in the sports department, for example, or where the early childhood development center people were trying to, I'm teaching college, so I know very little about little people. And you walk in and you don't necessarily get a solution for the problem, but you can see what you sort of feel what they struggle with. And then you can ask the right question at the right time, and that helps them to innovate. So you're not necessarily always the innovator. You can be the igniter of a new direction just by asking the right question at the right time. And you only know when to do that when you can connect with them and sort of feel where they are at that point. If you look at the whole shift in education itself, you can look at America, you can look at Finland, you can look at people talking in South Africa, you can see, you can look at all across the world. We're all saying the same thing, and yet we don't talk to each other directly. We all know where we're supposed to be going. And it's those little changes, those little knowing where to connect and knowing who to talk to and knowing who, when to ask the right question, that I think for me, innovation and it connects to that intrinsic human trait of intuition. Your gut does tell you a lot more than your brain does. And it doesn't have to be reactionary. It's very important, like you said earlier on. Take time and sit back and go and think about things. But sometimes in the moment, you know exactly when to ask the right question or when to point people in another direction. And it's that poking your nose in the wrong place that sometimes gets you to help other people get into the right direction where they want to be.
Thank you so much. That's helpful to hear. I like what you said about being an igniter of innovation and asking the right questions, which I've also included in the book. And I'm curious to know to what extent mindfulness, since mindfulness is also a really important aspect of developing intuition. What are your thoughts on that? Anyone want to share?
Well, I think mindfulness, if I can continue, I talk a lot. So just shut me up when I have to. Mindfulness is what got a lot of me and my colleagues, mindfulness exercises is what got us through a lot of hard times. And knowing where you are in the moment helps you to connect with the moment, I think. So if you know where you are, you're connected to what you are thinking and feeling, and you're in a moment, then you can connect better with whoever else is with you in that moment. And that helps you, push things further.
Thank you.
Okay, what I'm gonna send everybody off into the room so that they can have a more intimate chat and then come back with stuff that they can contribute. I think it generally encourages some of the quieter people to actually speak up. So I'm gonna hit the button and then boom, and then we'll be back in 10 minutes, and we can please bring back some good nuggets for Saleema so she can get gold from you. Okay, we'll go.
Hi, Saleema. I'd like to give a bit of feedback. I think you've almost got to be brave with the stuff that you get back. I mean, we had a different chat in our group in terms of you've got to learn to trust that visceral feeling that you get, and people forget that intuition is really like a visceral reaction, really, and you've got to learn to trust that. But I think in your case with your book, perhaps you need to trust that you are giving the right message. The right people that will actually need to hear it will hear it. Because I don't think you must sort of tailor your book to people. I think they need to hear your message, whether they're ready for it or not. So you know what? I think you must maybe write it as you think it and as you see it, because you might be streaks ahead of everybody else, and you don't want to put yourself into what everybody else is thinking. You might be light years ahead. So trust your intuition on it.
Can I add something to that and suggest to you, though, that you are also exceptionally creative in your own thinking. And I suspect you will find ways to create bridges rather than barriers.
Wonderful. That was wonderful, Janet.
Thank you. That's helpful, because I think sometimes it's like, to what extent, I think it's like I'm going through my own processing sometimes when I'm writing about these topics. I'm also learning and processing and mastering or developing. And so it's interesting, because I know that I have to be appealing to different audiences, and that some people will question the science of it. And so I'm trying to also provide evidence, but not make it just a lecture, because people do want to hear personal experience and not just what we hear from the major leaders. And I think I talked about in the breakout groups that, like Steve Jobs, we hear about Steve Jobs and, that he, to use empathy to create products like Apple's products, then we often leave out we don't hear as much about the story of how he developed that ability to be creative in that way. And we often forget about that. He took that journey to India and spent time doing a lot of inner work. And I think oftentimes that self-development is left out of the conversation when it comes to innovation. And that's something else I'm trying to show within the book, and also include other examples. If you know about any other leaders other than, Einstein and Steve Jobs, I'm trying to include more diverse leaders in that as well, and entrepreneurs. So.
I forget, Saleema, I forget the name of the inventor, but there's a Japanese inventor who, his theory of innovation as an individual is that starving himself of oxygen causes him to think better. And so, as opposed to most people who like go for a jog when they want to think better to increase their oxygen flow, he drowns himself in a pool. And then like comes out of the pool, like, just when he's about to drown. And he's got, I think, the record for most patents in the world. But he, clearly one of the things about intuition is, creators tend to, the big names, the people we talk about, they tend to try to get themselves into a state, right? And that state is a state of intuition, I think. So whether it's by drowning himself or whether it's by someone taking opium or whether it's, coffee or whether it's meditation, it seems that it's, historically accurate to say that intuition is a critical part of creative thinking, and that it is usually the professionals who do it for a living that have their own technique. There's the story of Dali. I don't know if you know that story, but Dali used to go to sleep in his atelier with the key in his hand, and then the key would fall out of his hand when he fell asleep, so that he would wake up into a sort of half, like a hypnagogic state, so that he was like half asleep, half awake. And that's how he, connected to these weird images of surrealism that he made. So, I mean, it seems like that is intuition, right? Like the idea of getting yourself into a state beyond logic. And I think you probably deal with this a lot in the book. Is we in the stuff we do here, like there's a lot of how do you wake up the subconscious and get it to participate freely, because that's why kids are so creative. Like their subconscious is just fully there, and it doesn't have a whole lot of complications. Like by the time we're our ages, our subconscious looks like a Quasimodo or something. It's been like completely battered and beaten up, and there's no intuition without it, So I don't understand really why it would be controversial to mention, the variety of I don't know what the right word is, spiritual or psychic states that you're talking about, especially because you're writing a book that's based on over 100 interviews with various people. So you're not speaking, like this is your idea or your point, right? But rather that these are the thoughts people have. So I would think you should go for it, and you've always got the excuse in a way of this is just one of the ideas that people have. It's not like you're saying this is the truth,
Yeah.
So I don't know. For me, that's like,
Can I, yeah, maybe I want to just chip something else in, and that is, there's a lot, sorry about that noise. As soon as I'm muted, it'll go away. The whole notion of threat and reward. If you want to engage people, you need to be careful of threatening them. So if you want to hold people with you, and I think that this is what you're wrestling with, Saleema, is you don't want to shut people out to the point where they shut down to everything else that you've got to say. So I think that that's just an important thing. Something else maybe that might be interesting. We were just talking about different forms of intuition, and we tend to think that it's logic or intuition. My personal opinion is that our brains are wired logically. If you understand neuronal transfer, it is logical. It goes from one neuron to the next. But there are different forms of intuition, and there are different, and for me, intuition is still logical. It's just a different form of logic. And I think that that's important. I was just telling my group the story of my father, who was an accountant, who could look at a piece of paper with a whole bunch of figures, and he would in seconds find the problem and have a solution to it. But that was very logical. And so again, it's defining what is innovation, where are we innovating, how are we innovating, and maybe not being so dichotomous about this logic intuition thing.
Thank you. This is all really helpful. And thank you so much, Michael, for the example of Yoshiro or Gary as well. I see you posted the article, because that's something I think we need to bring in diverse leaders and people that are, less famous, but they're doing really great work and that are great examples, because it's more sticky to hear about something different, especially as inclusion and diversity is important. And so I think it's great to hear people that are maybe less famous, but doing really, really good work. So that's a phenomenal 3,300 patents. So.
Well, if you want another example,
including the floppy disk. They invented the floppy disk.
Wow.
And the magnetic condom.
Okay. Someone else who was a phenomenal decision maker was Admiral Nimitz during the Second World War. I mean, he was sent in right after Pearl Harbor, and he had to basically sort out the whole Midway situation. And he took a huge risk by listening to a bunch of people who were not recognized in their community as specialists in decoding messages. And he took the risk and he listened to them, and it paid off in the end. So that's another nice example of where intuition helped in history.
Thank you. And what were your thoughts? I know we discussed it in the breakout room in my group, in the group I was in, but the clear senses, what were your thoughts on the clear senses and, those sixth sense almost pretty much that are like extra kind of beyond our physical senses? Because I like I was mentioning in the group, I don't know, I watch a bunch of shows like Black Mirror and different things. And so we see how like technology is automating a lot of decision making. And so to what extent do we have to tap into those, like develop those things? And I think mindfulness is also something that's really, really, we see a lot of some of the great leaders doing that. And those are some of their secrets, just being able to focus in that way and let go of thoughts. The associative thinking aspect, I actually wanted to ask you about that too, the dot connecting. Do you think that dot connecting and associative thinking, which I don't want the book to just appeal to other innovators, I want this to be something that people that are maybe, I want to meet people where they're at. And so I wanted to also invite people that are trying to develop those skills, being able to connect the dots just that we did, like just, some of the examples you shared are connecting dots, and it happens, it's kind of natural. And some of my interviewees said that people can develop that skill, but you should just try to find someone that has a gift and put them in the room. So I've had different thoughts on that. So I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Saleema, I can make a contribution there. I think there's 2 points of view, or there's 2 ways you can look at it. You can look at it as a gift, or you can look at this as a capability that you actively have to work developing. I personally fall into the second category. I do believe that by allowing yourself to extend your awareness, you actually come into contact with a lot of things other people might consider gifts. And for me, what I don't like about the gifts is you put it in the space of we don't understand this. Whereas I think it's fully within our capability to develop these skills, and I think they are skills.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to contribute to that?
I also, in our group, we also talked about, intuition is it's an unconscious process, and many of the models, if you look at creativity, is a whole lot of parts are in the unconscious. And we also said that if you look at intuition, and when are people more creative, and when do you have more access to your subconscious? It's mainly when you wake up and very close to falling asleep. So for us, we also discussed that intuition can be a state, and you can maybe use mindfulness or yoga or whatever type of method you want to, or technique you want to apply, get yourself into a state where you access your unconscious mind and let your unconscious mind then make the linking.
Thank you. And Janet, do you want to elaborate on that? The fewer dots you have to connect, just because we're moving as we're in this reinvention revolution, we're constantly, like I mentioned, generalists, and a lot of us are adapting in different fields, and it's no longer just like have a career 30 years in one expertise or field. It's a lot of that happening now. And so,
I'm a deep respecter of transdisciplinarity. I think that it's an awesome way to be. And I was just saying that if connecting dots is obviously something you can learn to do, but the fewer dots you have to connect, Saleema, on one of your slides, you spoke about the importance of knowledge, gaining knowledge. The more closely connected your dots are normally, in normal patterns, the less you're likely to come up with something innovative. But if you have more dots, there's more chance that you can come up with something interesting and different.
So is it like being able to have expertise in one area, but like a T, and having, you know, a couple other areas that you're also developing and moving and drawing from there? Because that contributes to the next chapter, which includes connecting the dots, and originality is intriguing. Originality is something else, because you can be an expert in something, but really what makes you unique is when you can innovate and bring something else and tie that in. And that brings originality, and that's the other.
So I think there are two possible, maybe there are more, but there are at least two ways of looking at that. One is that if you've got lots of disparate ideas and lots of disparate knowledge, you can connect more things together. But also you can simulate that by connecting with other people who've got other dots. And as long as you know how to connect dots, you can do that.
Thank you. And around the conversation of spirituality, we're moving into the spiritual world, which like I said, I've gone back and forth about talking about. My editor said, just be authentic and tell your story, you know, from my experience in Mozambique onwards. And it's just, I'm trying to be more vulnerable and authentic, but I also want to, you know, not be classified into this woo category, or I don't want to have a lot of pushback. And so I'm trying to make that connection between spirituality and innovation. I know mindfulness is a really important part of it. But again, I don't want to just preach to the other innovators. I want this to be something that people can feel, you know, comfortable, or it might make them just, you know, make them uncomfortable, which is also important. But to what extent should spirituality, you know, what are your thoughts on, like, we're moving this more spiritual world just because of, especially now with the pandemic, like we're forced to spend more time with ourselves and get to know ourselves more. And so what are your thoughts around this moving into this more spiritual world, which some of my interviews have been, especially during COVID, have been talking about?
I don't know if anybody else has this experience, but I realize that I've met so many people that I've never physically been with at all, you know? In fact, on this call right now, only Janet and Elaine are the only two people here I've ever physically met. And yet I don't feel like I haven't met these people. And the other day I went to a meeting for the first time with someone I met online in the past few months, and we actually sat and had a coffee. And it was the first time I've done that actually since lockdown, but I didn't feel awkward or like there was some difference between the Zoom world and the real world, you know? And I think a lot of that connects somehow to like intuition and spirituality, in the sense that like the connection I'm experiencing online on a call like this, I feel like I am connecting authentically to people in a way that is, it's not like, oh, because I'm not physically there, there's some lack of connectivity, right? And I don't know if other people have that experience. I think some people don't at all. But for me, I like Saleema, I feel like if I, you know, walk into a room where you are next year, I don't feel it'll be like, oh, wow, look at this different person. It's just like, okay, another manifestation of us, you know. And for me, I found that like the manifestation online or on Zoom, it does not in any way diminish my experience of the person. You know, I suppose it's different if we get into like sexuality or something, you know, but when it's just a intellectual or, you know, emotional connection, like, you know, there's a lot of people in this call that I've spent a lot of time with, but I've never physically ever seen them or been with them. I don't know what they smell like, and I don't think I even know what they look like from the waist down, you know, which is a bit weird if you think about it, you know. but I feel like absolutely sure that I don't have a limitation on my experience with the person. So I think, what is that, right? It's not like all my senses aren't being activated. I've got sight and sound for sure, but I'm not touching you, I'm not smelling you, I'm not tasting whatever, you know, I'm not like, that's not happening. And yet there's some other sense going on that allows me to feel like I know the person just as well as if I was sitting in the room with them. You know, and there's also lots of people we've spent lots of physical time with that we find out we didn't really know or whatever. So I don't know if that is even on point, but for me, it feels strongly on point that, like, I don't know why people should be freaked out by a discussion of those kind of thoughts, you know. And it is critical to me. It's critical to innovation and creativity. It's critical. Like, you can't discuss that without talking about something related to that kind of intuition, you know, like that kind of sixth or seventh or eighth senses, like that are participating more right now than 3 of the physical senses we're used to, at least. I mean, I simply cannot smell any of you, no matter what Gary says.
Maybe that's why we're closer.
You could trigger it. You could use your NLP to trigger it.
Gary's got a practice of always saying that he smells a baby, but I mean, he doesn't actually smell a baby.
I honestly do. Because the baby smell went away, and I looked around, and Anita was gone, and I was like, okay, well, that's why.
Saleema, I'd like to offer an opinion around the spirituality. I think it's very important that you, in that kind of, just by the way, South Africans have a habit of speaking very directively, but we actually don't mean it. So if I say you must or you have to, it's not as directive as that. But if you talk about spirituality, bringing that into the topic of innovation, I think it is important to frame it very carefully. Because, and in my personal experience working with people, the moment you start speaking about spirituality, it goes for them to religion.
Yeah.
And it's very important to avoid that connotation. And it's also very important to frame what you see spirituality meaning in the innovation sphere. Yeah. Because there's some people that, well, first of all, if a religious approach to it, they're immediately putting boundaries around what is acceptable to them or not. But on the other hand, it's also very easy for people, if you don't frame spirituality properly, to just outright dismiss what you are bringing to the table.
Thank you.
Can I share, Francois and Saleema? I think the timing right now from a spirituality point of view is more opportune than ever. So, and to Michael's point about being in lockdown and having reevaluated everything that's important, and I think a lot more of us have realized that there is a bigger picture. There's a lot more to life than the stuff that consumed us before we were forced into isolation. And so if you were ever going to have a conversation on spirituality, now would be a better time than any, I think. And I think it could transcend religion, and it's just the understanding of what mindfulness is, and being able to bridge that gap from the initial. And my thought always with spirituality was religion. And I think a lot of people are now moving beyond just true religion to understanding that spirituality and mindfulness are not necessarily the same thing, but it's about this greater awareness of self and how we exist in the world and how we engage with the world. Again, to Michael's point about the fact that we meeting people across continents, and we have resonance, and it's not the same space we were in before. So I think you probably are lucky that you have that opportunity to be able to introduce the concept now. I unfortunately do need to leave, but I wanted to share one other point on intuition. And we were in our breakout group, we were talking about the limbic system and about flight or the fight or fright, and kind of where all of that lives. And we had some strong opinions on how the brain works. And something that struck me a number of years ago, I was watching an interview with a whole number of sports stars. And I remember, so a short story, I was involved in youth cricket, and my son played cricket, and I remember watching under 10s play cricket, and I was scoring, and I then took the whole cricket team to an international test match the same day. We had box tickets, and we watched South Africa play Australia. And we were side on to the pitch, and Brett Lee was bowling, and Brett Lee could bowl at 100 miles an hour. And I remember him running up to bowl, and I could see him run up, and then I could see the batsman do something, and somebody else, but I couldn't see the ball. And I was watching it from a distance, and I could not see that ball. And I couldn't process how cricketers could actually, and whether it's, you might understand baseball a little bit better, but the speed at which everything is happening. And this documentary then spoke to these various sports stars who spoke about this golden moment and the fact that they get into, and again, we spoke about state, but this is a different state, a state of where if they had to think about what was happening, it would be too late. So if you're a F1 driver, or you're operating, you're a baseball player, a cricketer, or anything, and the speed at which things are happening is so fast that if you had to think about it, it's too late. And they are, and I think you spoke about training, they train to go into a different place, and they intuitively respond to the situation. But it's not just a random reaction, it's a controlled reaction, but it's happening so fast. And the word that I thought was the nugget that came out of our breakout room was trust. And the fact that there is that high degree of trust in your own ability, trust in the fact that you're going to, the way you're going to respond to the situation is going to be the right. And it obviously doesn't always happen because you sometimes go out or you sometimes go off. But that high degree of trust in your ability to respond to a situation. And I think when you get into the intuitive kind of space, that probably is the most important, that you actually need to potentially do away with thinking and just get into the state where you trust your body's ability or your brain's ability to provide you with the solution and the guidance that you need. And I think if you get into that state, and it's, I think the F1 driver, the cricketer, is the polar opposite of our Japanese friend who gets into almost, or to Dali, who slows down to that extent. And these other are heightened to the extent, but they both still have that high degree of trust that allows them to kind of operate in that space. That's my little contribution for what it's worth.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And this is sort of provoking me to think more about if intuition is also relying on our past experiences and certain elements of, what we know, and accessing that. I wonder to what extent, first of all, like with neuroplasticity in the future of work that we're entering, to what extent are we going to be able to access, go beyond the 7% of the brain that we're using currently? And another thing that I'm bringing up in the book, another chapter is on, interhuman awareness, which I'd love to also get your thoughts on if anyone has anything to share. Is like, in the past, it's been a lot of cross-cultural, like, management, cross-cultural dynamics. How do you deal with different cultures? But our world is, like someone mentioned, we're getting closer together. We're connecting across continents, and now there's a lot more mixing happening, a lot of interracial, a lot of mixing. And so how do we understand each other more as humans and not necessarily by culture. And that's another thing that I'm also introducing. And if anyone has any thoughts on that, just because we are a global community here that we're talking, you know, I'm from Canada, here in the US, but like we're all connecting on a deep level on these topics. And so really trying to understand humans as they are. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? And how do we kind of remove some of that cultural programming, which is still important? It can help us understand, but then we're also sometimes making assumptions that can actually hurt us and actually hurt innovation.
Saleema Flores here. I'm a bit worried in the direction you start thinking now, and I'm going to say why. On the human base, there's more similarities than differences. And what you want in a innovation process is diversity. You want different perspectives. You want to integrate differences. So the moment you move away from the differences and you say, let me just talk about the human being. I've interviewed and evaluated people around the world. And the one thing that we realized was that the culture is more the expression of different needs, or sorry, otherwise. The needs are exactly the same. The culture is the expression of that needs because of societal rules, regulations, expectations, and awarenesses. But if you go pure on, let's just look at the individual and how the individuals are connecting or differences, you're not going to be able to go into the diversification and get that into your innovation process.
So diversity of culture, but also, I guess what I meant was like interhuman, like basically the diversity of thought that happens, and how does, in culture, I think intercultural intelligence is still important, but I think that cross-cultural training has sort of, it's not, it was like a big thing in the 90s and the 2000s, and now we don't really, you know, it's important, but I think there's a reason why it's not as big as it's become kind of old, I think, because we can't make assumptions on certain cultures. And, you know, when I took cross-cultural management, they're like, if you were doing business with the Japanese, this is, you know, things to be aware of. And I think, yeah.
We let me put it the other way around, the way I experience it. We do not acknowledge the differences anymore that much. So I won't bow in front of a Japanese with my both hands handing over my business card to a Japanese, though the Japanese coming from his environment, his total different awareness of how the world, how things are functioning and how you should address things, and my total difference, that is exactly the diversity of thinking that is created in the process of innovation. So it's, but if I go then to my friend in Japan, who I meet, our needs are, what moves the person is exactly the same.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Like interhuman awareness versus intercultural?
So Saleema, maybe I'll just chip in there. And every single person on the planet is different. We may have some thoughts that we share and some ideas that we have in common, and a whole lot of, you know, frameworks that we all like, or some of us like, and all of those kind of things. But fundamentally, we're all different, which means that every time we connect with somebody, whoever they are, wherever they are, there is that potential to make new connections. Again, it's about the dots thing, you know, and if I can be shifted, I mean, we've done it tonight. You're thinking about things that, you know, in terms of my own background, stuff, a lot of stuff that I know, but you framed it differently. And therefore it's been fascinating and interesting, and you've asked some really great questions that have made me think differently. And so there's been learning, there's been shift and change that's happened because of this connection between us. And there's also possibly something around filtering and perception. And maybe and I don't know whether to frame this in terms of intuition or innovation, but if we can shift our filters and allow things in that maybe, what is it that allows us to shift a filter and have a new perception or a new way of seeing something, I think is also interesting.
Guys, I'm going to just make sure everybody knows that we have about 3 minutes left, and then we've altered our format today, which is fine. We didn't have a second breakout, but after about 3 more minutes, we need to just have a little bit of time to wrap up and people to share anything they want to share, and then we're going to be at 8:30 already. Can you believe how fast this goes? It's amazing, eh? When you have somebody engaging with such great content to talk about. So thanks, Saleema, for that. Anybody have a last comment or question? Saleema, would you like to wrap up a bit?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much again for your feedback. I think I've gotten a lot of validation here. I think to some extent I'm going to probably be, as my editor mentioned, to be more vulnerable about how I've gone through this conflict of, I think that might actually come up as more authentic, just so that people understand that this is a sensitive topic, but something that is necessary right now to discuss, and increasingly important since we don't necessarily hear the connection with innovation and intuition. Although a lot of the inventors, there's proof that it's there. So yeah, this is all really, really great feedback. I love the depth of these conversations on Zoom. Like, I just want to say thank you to Innotivity and Michael, and just inviting me, because I think that this is all such a great, this is a really, really nice group, and I think that it's a very safe space. A lot of real conversations happen here, and I appreciate that. And I can also put the link if you want to pre-order my book. We did reach our goal, but it is still available for pre-order. If you want, there is some perks with getting it through the campaign. There's a digital workbook for backers. And so I'm going to be testing a product before it actually becomes a physical one. So it's also included, and there's other perks, and just being a part of the author journey of being behind the scenes. I'll put the link in the chat.
And just so you guys see, while she was saying that, I just bought it. Here you go. Can you see it?
Thank you so much.
I bought mine.
So if anybody here wants to take the bold move and pre-buy the book while still on this call and tell us you did it, we will be so pleased and proud. You can't go wrong, right? The worst case scenario, you're supporting an amazing concept and cause. And if you don't like the book for some reason, you can give it to your friend. Not reason you wouldn't, but I mean, just in case. So, Saleema, I believe we discussed in the last couple of days, maybe coming back when the book is out. So maybe, when is that going to happen?
Yeah, so the release date is December 2020, which I'm supposed to deliver everything by then and get it out. And I think we've already pre-sold over 500 books. And so it's just crunch time right now to get it out. And but I'd be happy probably in the first quarter of 2021, because I'm going to do a bit of a virtual book tour, I guess, until it's safe to travel. And yeah, happy to come do another when the final project is there. It'd be great, because a lot of you are part of this, I guess, shaping, especially that chapter. So